The Fourth Way Up. Chapter 7. Man as a Chemical Factory for Food Processing. This is one of the most exciting parts of the Fourth Way teachings. This is the essence of the doctrine. It is a theory that explains what man is now and how consciousness can evolve. At the same time, this theory shows what techniques for the development of consciousness the Fourth Way uses, and what the advantages of these methods are in comparison with those used on other development paths. Of course, in this section, there is not the slightest attempt to describe all the processes of vital activity of the human body. For the practical use of this block of knowledge, it is essential, without falling into specifics, to understand the fundamental points of consumption, expenditure, and transformation of energies with which our body deals. This is the central question of human existence. We expend more energy than we acquire. The constant lack of energy in the body makes it impossible to hold a high level of consciousness. We waste a lot of energy in the most useless way to maintain negative emotions. These can be resentments, fears, guilt, jealousy, envy, etc. On the other hand, we know of no other way to get energy except from ordinary food. However, the energy received must also be properly transformed to nourish the higher centers. To this section of knowledge of the Fourth Way, we have to return each time after another change in our level of being, and, consequently, in our ability to understand. Let us first make a brief excursion into the section related to the science of hydrogen. The term hydrogen has the broadest meaning. Quote, any simple element is hydrogen of some density, and any combination of elements having a known function, both in nature and in the human organism, is also hydrogen. End of quote. We are talking about a model of the world as a sum of vibrational structures that differ from each other in the magnitude of the density of vibration. This characteristic is what hydrogen is. Theoretically, one can represent all types of hydrogen in the universe as a table. Someone may do it at some point. So far, for a qualitative understanding of the meaning of energy transformation in the human organism, it is enough to limit ourselves to the information from Gurdjieff concerning the values of hydrogen obtained with 3 types of food. Also, remember that the lower the number of hydrogen, the greater its vibration density and energy. One can think of the human body as a 3-story food processing and transformation factory. Conditionally, the part of the human body below the diaphragm is accepted for the first floor. The second floor is the body part, enclosed between the diaphragm and the human head. The third floor is the head of the man. There are 3 types of food available. Food. The average value of hydrogen is 768. Air, which, according to the teachings of the Fourth Way, contains, along with the oxygen of the air, about 20 active elements that are assimilated by the body. The average hydrogen value is 192. And finally, impressions. The average hydrogen value is 48. The transformation of food in the human body follows 2 laws, the law of 3 and the law of 7. Incoming food is a conductor of passive force and is labeled as oxygen, 768. In the original state, it is in the Dor note or Dor transformation phase. See a picture of the initial stage of food transformation. Here, oxygen 768 mediated by nitrogen 384 interacts with carbon 192. The result is a certain oxygen 384, note RECH, which interacts with carbon 96 through the mediation of nitrogen 192. We get processed food going to the second floor. The food in a person's mouth mixes with the conductor of active force, the enzymes of saliva, and the conductor of neutralizing force, water. Then, in the stomach and duodenum, The food mixes with the gastric juice and pancreas enzymes. Carbon-192. This digestion process is mediated by a conductor of neutralizing force. Acid, or as chemists say, protonated water, nitrogen-384. The result of the interaction has a hydrogen value of 384. It further appears as oxygen, Re-384. The coincidence of the values of the hydrogen-nitrogen 384 and oxygen 384 indicates that they are the same level of vibration density or matter development, but does not mean that they are the same substance. Nitrogen 384 is a solution of protons in water, and oxygen 384 is a solution of broken down food molecules. What is common is that both of these matter are liquids. The molecules of liquid food can already penetrate the walls of the stomach and intestines. In the blood, they interact with the active element, carbon-96, mediated by nitrogen-192. It is not difficult to guess that carbon-96 is the numerous components of the blood capable of interacting with small molecules of broken-down food that penetrate the blood with the help of blood plasma, nitrogen-192. The process can't go any further. According to the law of octaves, an additional shock is needed to bridge the interval between me and fa. This is where the body's second octave of nutrition, the air we inhale, comes into play as the mechanical shock. The teachings of the fourth way state that air contains about 20 hydrogens, of which, depending on the level of consciousness, the organism can assimilate this or that amount of air hydrogen. For example, as Jonathan Stampler's research has shown, traces of nitric oxide contained in the air, as well as synthesized within the body from atmospheric nitrogen, are captured by sulfur molecules present in hemoglobin and in the form of S-nitrosohemoglobin are used by the body to regulate the processes of gas exchange of tissues. If some brain structure begins to work more intensively, then due to nitric oxide, in the form of S-nitrosohemoglobin here, the release of oxygen from the blood hemoglobin increases. This, in turn, leads to an intensification of metabolism in that location. Next, there is an increase in the number of cells of this structure. That is, sustained effort, such as self-remembering, leads to forming an appropriate structure that supports self-remembering processes. However, if a person lives a routine life, they do not have the intense brain activity that requires increased cellular respiration and cell growth, hence the consumption of nitric oxide. Oxygen in the air, mediated by hemoglobin, enters the blood plasma, interacting with food molecules bound to blood elements mediated by the blood plasma. As a result, oxygen Me-192 receives additional energy that allows it to interact with carbon-48, mediated by nitrogen-96. The formed hydrogen-96 further acts as oxygen Fa-96, which similarly interacts with carbon-24, mediated by nitrogen-48 on the third floor. So, in the head, hydrogen-48, glucose, or maybe adenosine triphosphate, is formed, which is the fuel of the intelligent parts of the centers. This fuel is of relatively low quality. Accordingly, the intellectual center is the slowest working center. Experimental psychology tells us that, on average, one thought takes a person 6 seconds to form. Next, this hydrogen-48, acting as the passive element oxygen-Sol-48, interacts with the active element, carbon-12, mediated by the conductor neutralizing these forces, nitrogen-24. The process takes place on the second floor. The hydrogen-24 formed are intermediates for synthesizing sex hormones on the first floor. Once again, we emphasize that we are talking about more than one substance. These are both steroid hormones and prostaglandins. Hydrogen-24 fuels the motor, instinctive, and emotional centers. Hydrogen-24, as a passive element, oxygen La-24, reacts with the active element C6 with the mediating role of nitrogen-12, the sum of the highest hydrogen possible for a man not working on himself. C12 is formed. The sexual center operates on this energy. Below is a table of the complete total energy transformation. The air octave develops as follows. The portion of the air entering the body has an average energy level of hydrogen 192, and as a passive element, oxygen 192 interacts on the second floor with the active elements of the blood, carbon 48 mediated by nitrogen 96. This produces a new element, hydrogen 96, which, as oxygen Reh 96, interacts with carbon 24 mediated by nitrogen 48. Hydrogen 48 is formed. According to the law of octaves, this passive element, the oxygen of Me 48, cannot transform further without an additional shock. The next octave of food, impressions, can provide such a boost. Impressions come in as hydrogen 48, but no further conversion is possible because the necessary active element, carbon 12, is missing at this point. This carbon 12, perhaps S-nitrosohemoglobin, is sufficient elsewhere in the body, but here it is not because of the stoppage of perceiving impressions as energy. This is determined by our low level of consciousness. We are, in terms of perception and information processing, somewhat asleep. In some people, the intellectual center is quite active, which is not the case with the emotional center. In other people, on the contrary, the emotional center is active. In the first case, we gain verbal knowledge. In the second, only feelings. Both states do not allow perceiving the fullest possible spectrum of impressions. From a practical point of view, the critical question is, what impressions and information can be so powerful as to change from hydrogen 48 to hydrogen 24, and then to higher hydrogen 12? The strongest impression is the fear of death. Military men who have been in real battles say that there are no atheists on the front lines. An acquaintance told me he instantly recognized God while sliding into the abyss. He claimed to have survived by sensing the presence of God nearby and asking him to save him. It is no accident that monks recommend praying at coffins. Besides the fear of death, there are three other emotions that Gurdjieff called objective. It's faith, hope, and love. Only by reaching high development do these emotions become. The faith of consciousness becomes freedom. The hope of consciousness becomes strength. And true love becomes a cosmic force flowing through us. Such powerful, conscious impressions can transform into higher hydrogen and become food for the higher centers. Simultaneously, when such strong impressions are received, their excess energy gives an external shock to the octave of the second kind of food, air, and the subsequent production of the high hydrogen Sol 12. The shock given in the octave of impressions leads to the production of three hydrogens, Sol 12, Me 12, and C 12. Sol 12, continuing its transformation, transforms into La 6 while giving a mechanical shock to hydrogen Me 12 and an organizing conscious shock to hydrogen C 12. Accordingly, a state of self-consciousness and then objective consciousness arises. These higher states of consciousness are manifestations of the Holy Spirit through the human body. All the fantastic qualities possessed by saints and prophets manifest in these states of consciousness. However, in magic, dangerous means are used to transform into higher hydrogen, such as suffering, pain, and psychically active substances. Since in magic, the false personality plays the leading role in the transformation process, the higher emotional center is oriented to goals far from self-development, such as obtaining power and money. It's called false crystallization. Gurdjieff Realizing this danger, consciously gave up the ability of telepathic hypnosis that he had developed in himself. It is no secret that some governments know and try to apply esoteric knowledge for the selfish interests of their countries, or more likely, clans and monopolies. However, the experiments with energies that these experimenters awaken in their subjects often end in unreliable clairvoyant data or psychic disorders. As Gurdjieff warned, opening the fourth room with a lockpick gives false results. This room appears to be empty. It is impossible to avoid the fact that a person who has not worked on himself is a broken biocomputer, which must first be repaired, i.e. cleaned of negative emotions, incorrect work of centers, and loaded with correct programs. Then, one must train the operator to work with this biocomputer. However, let's go back to the food of impressions. Can a person filled from birth with fears, fantasies, imagination, wrong upbringing, lack of will, and inner integrity have true divine love in the higher centers? Of course not. It's not about love between people. After all, as the saying goes, from love to hate is one step. Self-remembering is one of Gurdjieff's primary methods for increasing the power of impressions. What is self-remembering? It is, if possible, constant realization of oneself as a spirit in the body, that is, as the master of one's biocomputer. What is particularly important for the body is that our emotional center foolishly burns the energy we receive. The fire is negative emotions. Negative emotions can be products of impressions, both received by the essence in past incarnations and in this life. As a result, little energy comes to the important intellectual part of the emotional center, and nothing at all to the higher emotional center. It is to strengthen the perception of impressions that the technique of self-remembering described earlier is used. We also need to realize that it's hard for us to do anything substantial with the first and second kinds of food, but it's up to us to choose which experiences to choose. We can look at the TV screen and see endless soap operas and series, murder and violence, or we can be in nature and feel connected to the process of life on Earth. We can listen to the jagged rhythms of modern music makers, primitive songs whose content can only be pleasing to a certain kind of connoisseur. Or we can enjoy the immortal works of the masters of the past and present. Through the right choice, people can increase the power of their impression and feel the real beauty and splendor of life, all that we pass by without noticing. Gradually, due to numerous attempts at self-remembering, the process of genuinely normal perception is restored. It gives not only an amazing fullness of perception of life, but also a new quality of consciousness. When talking to people, you will see the slightest nuances of their reactions and moods. You will not derail into emotion or identification. You will be pretty difficult to deceive. However, the most potent hydrogen is given by the awareness of yourself as the spirit in this body that controls the biocomputer and the mind, and the understanding that your presence in this space-time is temporary. As a result of the shock you give by amplified impressions to the octave of air, the elements of air will be transformed along the chain Fa, 24, Sol, 12, La, 6. The hydrogen, So 12, and La, 6, are the food of the higher emotional and intellectual centers. Even though there is very little of these energies, the centers will begin to function better, manifesting as a heightened sense and awareness of life, intuition, conscience, understanding, and the like. The energy of perception is transformed along the chain Do, 48, Re, 24, Mi, 12. Here, the oxygen Do, 48, is the incoming impressions into the body. Nitrogen, 24, is the attention that organizes the perception of impressions, and carbon Me12 is the selective interest of the magnetic center in information. This is where influences B are sifted from uninteresting influences A. The intellectual part of the emotional center and partially the higher emotional center work on Me12 energy. This process will strengthen and improve the so-called magnetic center, which is the compass regarding the ideas of the fourth way. A second conscious shock is needed to bridge the interval in the octave of the first food between C12 and DOR6, and in the octave of the third food, a mechanical shock is needed between Me12 and Fa6. The transformation of sexual energy yields the most significant amount of spiritual energy. Transformation of the energy of Me12 creates a third force in relation to C12. That is, it directs the energy of C12 to the formation of a new consciousness, in other words, to the correct construction of the astral body. Such consciousness is directed toward further development and improvement, not toward any other goals. If the astral body is formed with a consciousness oriented to a particular result, revenge for someone, acquiring money or power, or achieving any special qualities, this is the end of the process of human development. This is the so-called false crystallization of the astral body. In this case, the interests of the false personality govern the essence of the person. This is how all sorts of real magicians and psychics are formed. The nature of the second conscious shock is to transform negative emotions into positive ones. Of course, one cannot consciously relate to one's emotions without having constant self-remembering, that is, the first conscious shock. Therefore, the first and second conscious shocks usually occur simultaneously. Disassociation with the negative emotion allows it to be seen by the intellectual part of the emotional center without being identified with the experience. This kind of work transforms negative emotions into positive ones. A specific description of the psychological process occurring during the transformation of negative emotions into positive ones is interesting. T.O., an active researcher of her inner world, talks about this moment. Quote, "When a negative emotion arises, I sort of separate it from myself and scrutinize it, and the longer, the better. It gives a strange experience, somehow reminiscent of sexual arousal. Next, this emotion fades away, leaving a feeling of power. Moreover, the stronger the negative emotion, the greater the force resulting from the transformation." End of quote. From this observation, it is clear that great fear is necessary for the blockade of great power. When a person gets rid of any fear, he is empowered. The very process of transforming the food of impressions into higher hydrogen is the creation of higher bodies, astral, mental, and causal. Man number 4 is just beginning the transformation of impressions and the accumulation of higher hydrogen. Man number 5 has already experienced the transmutation of hydrogen, the sexual energy C12, and the partial opening of the higher emotional center, receiving in the octave of air hydrogen La6. His astral body is formed, and the mental body is beginning to form. Man number 6 also formed a mental body. He has the higher emotional center working steadily, and the higher intellectual center partially switched on. Man number 7 is a fully realized spirit in the human body. He has all bodies formed, and both higher centers working. From the esoteric point of view, the feat of Jesus Christ during the crucifixion is the most outstanding example of the conscious transformation of the strongest suffering into positive emotions, that is, the second conscious shock. In later times, many Christian martyrs attained sane holiness precisely as a result of the second conscious push. Having studied man As an example of a hydrogen transformation factory, it is necessary to proceed to the study of the flora and fauna of the Earth to understand what place in this world man occupies. We may discover beings more advanced than ourselves,